Another aspect of therapeutic art that's wonderful is that it can be used with all kinds of client configurations. So we can do art with individuals, with families, with couples, and in groups. Okay, so how does art differ from other types of treatments? Well, art allows us to safely project our memories, our thoughts, and our feelings and understandings of the world into the creations that we make. And of course, this is very, very helpful to our clients. It works well with other therapeutic interventions, and because it is working with the visual aspects of life, even sound, if you think about crumpling paper and working with the materials and all, and even our olfactory senses, just on many levels, it taps into the different sensory aspects of life. In addition, art is very kinesthetic, so whether we're crumpling paper or pounding on clay or maybe using a brush to dab the paint, there's a very strong physical connection. And this helps clients with their physical expression of what they're experiencing emotionally. In addition, on a neurological level, studies have shown that through the creation of art, stored memories can be reprocessed in the brain, and this definitely helps with healing. And we're finding this more and more as we look at neuroscience. In addition, art is not age-specific, so whether you're 4 or 40 or 8 or 80, everybody can create art. When we're looking at doing therapeutic art, it's not about creating a pretty picture. Sometimes when clients hear that they might be doing therapeutic art, they begin to think, oh my gosh, I'm going to have to do a picture of a flower in a vase, but it's not like that. It's representational. So when we're talking about behavioral concerns, what types of concerns can we target with art? Well, certainly substance abuse, and for the purposes of this presentation, we're talking about the use of both street drugs as well as prescribed medications. We're dealing with alcoholism and eating disorders. Many of our clients deal with hyperactivity and impulse control problems, and with art, it helps them to connect physically back with their bodies. And again, whether they're working with the clay or paint or other materials, they can actually have a physical use, let go of some of that energy that they might be holding on to. In addition, the creation of art is calming. Art helps our clients with their trauma and their fears, whether we're talking about domestic violence, bullying, big traumas such as rape and all. It can help them to distance themselves just enough from their problems that they can begin to be the observer of those problems instead of sinking into them. And it will help them to begin to more fully understand their choices and the outcomes. In addition, art is a gateway to helping clients to deal with a more manageable environment. In other words, when they're in the process of creating art, it's a smaller environment, and they can explore these frightening situations and begin to process their trauma. For clients who are dealing with dissociation, insecurity, low self-esteem, self-isolation, and loneliness, art helps with identity formation, self-concept, and self-image through the exploration of the representational images that are created. We also use art to deal with anger and guilt and acting out. And as those of you in the mental health profession know, anger is usually a surface emotion. And if we look below it, it's really covering up for other deeper emotions such as depression, fear, insecurity, low self-esteem, sadness, or lack of identity. And many times, the reasons that the client is experiencing this is because they either have the sense of lack of control over their environment or over what is happening to them, or they don't have the coping skills to deal with it. And through art, the clients can safely channel their sadness, anger, and stress into their creations. So it helps them to gain a sense of control over their environment as they manipulate these materials and see what kinds of emotions and thoughts are generated through the process. When we look at therapeutic art and addiction, we have to look at the trauma connection. And when we talk about trauma, in the present, we often hear about big T's and little t's. So little t's are those smaller, everyday stressors that can add up to become one big trauma. So for example, if a client is living in an abusive situation where maybe they're not being sent to the hospital with injuries, but they're dealing with ongoing verbal abuse or they're witnessing it, all of those day-to-day incidents can add up to the sense of a bigger trauma. And then the big T's are those very, very intense experiences such as rape or witnessing a murder or being in active combat. And the thing about trauma is that it affects the Broca's region in the brain, and this region is connected with being able to put experiences into words. So art works on the preverbal and nonverbal levels, and through metaphor and symbol, it helps the clients to begin to be able to process what they've been through. And when we talk about symbol and metaphor, what we're saying is that what they create can actually mean something very different to them. According to Scott and Ross, the creative process supports their authentic expression of their affect, so meaning that they can now, in a very real way, begin to experience those emotions, but safely and from a distance. It also can help with the emotional cleansing through the symbolic representations that are created, so helping them with their trauma. They can also they're projecting the trauma into this artwork, so now it's externalized. In addition, they're creating a safe space in which to do it. The whole therapeutic atmosphere of creating art is in the sense of a safe space. Also, by doing art, clients can begin to develop a balanced locus of control. And when we talk about a balanced locus of control, what we're saying is how affected are we by the outside stimuli versus our own processes. And also, art helps with identity development. So it allows clients to revisit and recreate all of the developmental stages that they've been through, and that helps them to begin to move toward wholeness in their sense of self. That obviously leads to integration of the self and healing. In addition, the experience of working with art can create a sense of transcendence. And this means that it's awareness beyond everyday knowledge. So they're really tapping into their own self, their own intuition, and it can give a deeper sense of spiritual connection. Art can also help to bring clients into a trance state, and this can bring them to new levels of awareness. And during this process, they are experiencing the entire cycle of creation, from the idea of an initial concept to making it concrete, and possibly for some activities, even destroying it. It's really interesting to think about how art works, because art works on a spatial matrix rather than a linear matrix. Language is linear. Art is spatial. So it means that clients can express themselves on multiple levels simultaneously rather than looking at things in a sequential manner. And it really opens the brain to new cognitions as a result of that. We're going to look a little bit at brain function and how it connects with doing therapeutic art. So brain physiology is affected by many factors. Children who are exposed to trauma between the ages of 0 and 5 can actually have deleterious changes in their brain function related to just differences in their neuronal wiring. In other words, how the neurons are wired together in their brain. And if you look at brain scans of people who have had this kind of trauma, in SPECT scans, you can actually see holes in the imaging as a result of it. And substance abuse can also affect the prefrontal cortex of the brain, and in particular the nucleus accumbens, which is related to the brain's pleasure center. The good news is that we are now becoming more and more aware of the concept of brain plasticity, which refers to the brain's ability to reorganize its circuitry. So through doing activities like art, going to therapy, engaging in proper nutrition and rest, and removing toxicities in the environment, the brain does have the ability to regenerate some of the healthy neurons that might be lacking. And a physician could certainly help a client with this kind of information, a neuro physician. Okay, so art activities help the brain because they increase cognitive performance, and metaphor has specifically been linked to increased activity in the cingulate gyrus, which is in a part of the limbic system in the brain and is tied to emotional regulation. And research suggests that creativity also results in an active reconfiguration of the cortical areas of the brain, meaning the cerebral cortex. And this ties in with sensory processing and higher reasoning. Okay, so when we look at therapeutic art and substance abuse, art bypasses limitations in communications. So if a client is not doing as well in being able to articulate what's happened to them, if they're having problems with coping or problem solving in their socialization, art is a way for them to still work through their stuff. Also, it supports safe confrontation of emotions, therefore it helps to build emotional strength, and it integrates really well with CBT, cognitive behavioral therapies. So it helps with identification and monitoring of thoughts and emotions. It allows for safe interaction with visual cues that could be related to the substance that's being abused or the substance that the client is addicted to, meaning that they can look at the actual image, let's say if it's a bottle of alcohol or a specific drug, and they can begin to process it in the safe way through imagery. Also, it supports the development of ordered thinking, and as we all know, people who are dealing with abuse, substance abuse and addictions and eating disorders are experiencing oftentimes a great deal of chaos, so it can help to reduce this. The actual process of creating art can help people to feel better about themselves as they go through this process of creation, something that maybe they haven't experienced ever or in a very long time. And also it helps clients to begin to build a sense of responsibility through their choices and in what they put into their creative product. When we look at therapeutic art and alcoholism, we know that oftentimes these clients can be quite impaired, and art again allows them to bypass these impairments and create at the level that's working for them. On the physical level, art helps our clients with stress reduction, with symptom relief, with physical rehabilitation, and also it helps to stimulate the depressed sensory system, which is often a problem with people who are dealing with alcoholism. On the cognitive level, therapeutic art helps clients with problem solving. It helps them to begin to see things from a new perspective, so it changes their perceptions. It helps them with their boundary explorations, and also it provides them with opportunities for self-observation. More and more in our work as clinicians, we're seeing the importance of the mind-body connection. So another part of working with therapeutic art is that there is a meditative aspect to the process of creating art, and also it's a great way to practice mindfulness, because when you're doing art and you're focused on your art, you are really in the moment. On the spiritual level, art helps our clients to become empowered as they create this new physical object, and they develop mastery over the materials. It helps them to have an increased sense of control, as I mentioned earlier. In addition, on a spiritual level, the clients, after they create their art, might choose to tell the story, and this story helps to bring them into new realms. It might even tie in with fantasy, and that's okay. That may be a part of their healing. On the emotional level, art helps the clients through the fact that it's a projective technique, and this opens communications. It also is a safe way for clients to engage in truth-telling about the images. It might be very hard for them to talk about what's happened to them or about their addiction in just regular words, but through the art, the truth can begin to come out, and then they can begin to face it. In addition, it helps them to begin to experience self-regulation. Okay. As I mentioned before, art works well with other treatment approaches, and that includes talk therapy. In addition, it can be an alternative to talk therapy because sometimes our clients either don't want to or can't talk about what's happened to them. Maybe they're tired of discussing it, or it's just too traumatic. So this gives them a way to begin to approach it. And when we're dealing with clients with eating disorders, it helps them to begin to explore their body image, their self-esteem, and their depression and self-isolation in ways that are not threatening. So some examples of activities that might help clients to explore their body image would be working with a simple outline of a shape on paper that they can begin to complete in whatever way they like to explore their story. Another possible activity is for them to lay down on top of a roll of paper that's been rolled out on the floor, and somebody else can do a body tracing. And in the same way as the smaller piece, they can do this full-scale representation of how they see their own self and where they are in terms of their emotions and their thoughts. Now, laying on a piece of paper on the floor and having somebody trace you does take a little bit of trust. So that would be something that might work well with a group that's been together for a while, or a therapist who's developed excellent rapport with their client. Oftentimes when clients are in treatment, it's for short term, and in short-term settings, we want to focus on fairly simple projects that don't require a lot of time, and yet at the same time help the clients to create safety. And one of the benefits of doing these kinds of treatments is it does give them an opportunity to interact with others, and they can begin to explore their risky behaviors and choices. And it helps, again, with identity formation. Again, a big piece about doing art is this increased sense of safety. And they can begin to develop and explore and experiment with new successful behaviors that are going to help them once they complete treatment. It also helps them to develop an increased ability to cope with stressors and to, of course, explore and experience their emotions. Also, an example with short-term treatments would be, let's say, the clients can just take a shoebox and they can either create a little diorama of what's been happening in their life, or they can use it to be a safe space to put their emotions. And another option for a rather simple project would be to do collage, in which they can pull from magazines and books and just tear out images to put them on paper. Okay, I just want to check in with you real quickly. If any of you have questions, you can type those in, and we are going to get to those in a little while. So feel free to do that. And now I'm going to talk about doing therapeutic art with families. And when we work with families and do art, it offers a way for the families to interact that is generally less confrontational than talk therapy. And it's a new way for them to relate to each other that maybe they haven't tried before, and it's less threatening. Art is also an equalizer for people of all ages and developmental and cognitive states. So it helps to level out the family so that they can all communicate equally. When families do therapeutic art, oftentimes their hidden messages and belief systems come to the surface, and then they can be explored together with the therapist. It also gives them an opportunity to practice problem-solving skills and to develop a sense of belonging with each other. And in addition, doing art with families can create a record of the session. And then the therapist can hold that, and at a later time the family might go back and look at it to see where they've been and where they're going to. So examples of projects that we might do with families can be a project that's, one of them is called the Circle of Hands, and in that one, on again a large piece of paper, like a rolled paper that's been cut to fit the table, each family member does a hand tracing. So I don't know if any of you remember doing that in elementary school, like for Thanksgiving to make a turkey, but you would do an outline of your hand and then decorate that any way you choose with the different materials that are provided. So whether it's markers or stickers or glitter or stamps, whatever is available, then they can make that hand very personalized to represent who they are. And then the family members can go around to talk about what they put in their hand to represent who they are, but also to discuss different emotions that they feel and see which ones they share with each other and different preferences, and they can actually begin to connect to each other, even drawing lines so that they can see how they're similar to each other and even different from each other, and explore it safely. Another project might be to create a mandala, which is a circle. I'm going to talk about them more in a little while. And by creating this circle, it creates a defined space for where the family lies, and within that space, the different family members can add to it the representations that they want to bring in to discuss. Okay, so in groups, art provides a supportive environment and helps to increase a sense of hope in our clients. There's opportunities for social interaction, which many of our clients may have been lacking, or at least healthy social interaction, which would be great for them to experience to compare with what they've been dealing with. It also can provide motivation and challenges to the client. And within groups, clients can work either on individual projects where each one is doing the same project but separately, or they can all work together on one project, and I've given you a few examples of those. It just depends on what the therapist wants to do at that moment and what the goal is for that particular session. Now, in groups, the projects are generally more structured and directive so that the group can stay cohesive as it moves towards the goal of completing the project. And then in groups, we generally focus on a specific theme or problem. So when we're working with substance abuse, we may cluster the clients together who are dealing with a certain kind of group of substances, or certainly if people are dealing with eating disorders, then they might be in their own group. An example of a group project that kind of combines the individual concept with the group would be for each client to do their own drawing based on, let's say, their self-concept, how they see, each of them sees his or herself, and then taking all of those individual drawings and putting them up on the wall to create a quilt that represents the group. Again, if you have any questions, please send them in. Okay, and there are all different types of art media out there, and depending on which medium we use, it will affect how much emotional expression there is and what the product is going to be like, of course, that the client creates. So generally, the materials like lead pencils and colored pencils, they're considered tighter, there's more control over those items, and they are going to evoke usually less emotion than the looser materials. So when we think about that spectrum of materials, if at one end we have pencils, at the other end we would have finger paints, which are really loose. So what that means is that if a client is highly emotional and maybe dysregulated, we probably wouldn't give them finger paints during that session. We would give them something that they can begin to work with to help them to safely explore those emotions so that they don't become even more dysregulated. And we also want to remember that doing art is not about doing representational art. So we can take that stress away from the clients if they have anxiety over it. And oftentimes some of the most meaningful art is through the creation of the abstract. So clients can explore different shapes, different lines, maybe different textures, color. And when we are looking at what the client is doing, we want to make sure that we are focusing on it from their perspective, because one person's squiggle may just represent a squiggle, and for somebody else it could be something very deeply meaningful. It might represent a snake, which is something that's perhaps scary to them. It could represent their path and their journey. We just don't know until they possibly talk with us about it if that's what they choose to do. In addition, we can't jump to conclusions, let's say, about color. So if I say the color red to you, some of you might say, oh, red, that must mean that this client is angry. And somebody else might interpret red as meaning hearts and love and red roses. So we just don't know. We don't know until the client either shares it with us or until later we see how the changes are happening in them. Art can also be used as an effective assessment tool. For example, there is a project that's called the House Tree Person Project, and that's one where the person does a picture of a house, a tree, and a person in the same picture. And within the picture we can see, based on how those aspects of the picture interact with each other, their relative shapes, and all of the details, what's possibly happening within that client. And it might give them a chance to safely explore it as well. Okay, again, if you have any questions, please send them in. Okay, so here are some examples of different art projects. So this is a collage, and collages are great for exploring dreams and goals. They're very easy to do. As I mentioned earlier, they can be used for a quick project, and the client can either tear the images, cut them, they can bring in ribbons, stamps, buttons, just all kinds of things. Whatever the therapist has that they want to bring into it, the client can glue onto the paper. Three-dimensional art can be used to help create a safe space and also to explore the self in relation to the world. So ideas for three-dimensional art or creating a box would be either a shoebox, which I mentioned earlier, or they have pre-made wooden boxes that can be obtained at stores such as Michael's, or the client can take cardboard and create one on their own. And I'm sure there are many other ideas out there. I'm thinking that you could even maybe take a ball, and if you were to cut it open like a large play ball, that can become a space too. So use your imagination. Okay, clay and model magic is very kinesthetic because there's a lot of pushing and pulling and shaping. It's great for emotional release and for exploration of body image. Now with clay, usually we would use clay that's water-based rather than oil-based. And what's nice about it is if you add enough water to it, it can get pretty mushy, and that's great for emotional expression. Also, you can use Model Magic, which is a plastic-based product. And Model Magic dries within a few hours, so that the client can create something and it will actually harden and they can keep it without it being overly fragile. There's a whole range of ways to use drawings. Clients can do free drawings, they can do directed drawings. The picture that's on here is of a scribble where the client starts with their eyes closed and they do a scribbling shape, and then they can rotate the picture and look at it from the 4 different sides and then see what image comes to them and then develop that image. So there's lots of interpretation and ways to use drawings. Okay, with painting, there's freer expression. It can be less directive, and again, you're leaning now toward a little bit more in the way of emotional expression too, similar to clay. So the clay is doing it in a 3-dimensional way, painting is doing it 2-dimensional. Clients can make masks and face castings. So this is a picture of face castings, and then in addition you can do masks on something as simple as like a paper plate, or you can get the pre-cut little mask shapes over at Michael's, and it helps clients to explore how they see themselves and also how they want to be seen. Now, these face castings are done using real casting material, such as used if somebody has a broken bone. And it does require, generally you're laying down, I guess it could be done standing up. They've got to put Vaseline around their whole face into their hairline, and it requires trust. Some of these are done in which the eyes are actually covered with the material, and for clients who maybe are having severe trust issues or less stable, maybe it would be better to use the little pre-made masks or a plate to do their mask until they feel safer. Can do puppet making. Puppet making is great for self-exploration, for psychodrama, and also for projection. So taking what's happening within the self and letting the puppet do the talking. Very safe. Okay, so here are the mandalas. Mandala means wheel or circle in Sanskrit, and they've been around for eons. The pictures that are shown here are very, very structured. They don't have to be. Basically, by creating a circle, the client can work within this boundary. It creates a safe holding space for their emotions and for their thoughts. And Carl Jung actually found that his clients created them spontaneously, and he was the first psychotherapist to talk about the healing properties of creating mandalas. There are various other expressive activities that also help clients to express without words. I happen to be certified in equine-assisted psychotherapy, and I have seen how amazing that can be as well. Drumming, sand tray, which again allows clients to create images in a way that's nonverbal. So you may have personally experienced some of these and could attest to the value of them as well. Okay, well, here are my references. And at this point, if you have questions, we can go over those. And I want to thank you for participating.
Okay, everybody. Thank you, Audrey. And at this time, I just want to let everybody know that you will receive 1 CE credit for attending the webinar today. You will need to go to soft.institute.com, access the questionnaire, and within 72 hours you will be receiving an email from us regarding that. Any other questions?
Okay.
Okay. Pardon?
Okay.
Okay, well, I want to thank everybody. Go ahead.
Yeah, no, here's the information on the CEUs for you to discuss.
Right. You will need to access the website, www.sovinstitute.com, and log in there. And then we will be emailing you within 72 hours, most likely sooner than that. So thank you so much, Audrey, and thank you, everybody, for your participation and joining in. And again, we have monthly webinars, and we look forward to your return. Thank you, everybody.